Welcome to the 8th episode of the Farms of BC podcast. I'm your host, Jay Cack, and today Nav, and I will be discussing the various different types of greenhouses. Some would say this is the most efficient form of farming, and after our conversation today, I'd have to agree. Stay tuned. All right, Nav, you got to help me out with this one. As you know, traditionally, we've always done ground crops, ground vegetable crops, and we've always done berries.
Yeah.
Outdoors. Everything's outdoors. Now, the topic for today, greenhouses.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually looking into this. I've been looking into this for a while now. Strawberries inside a greenhouse.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pros and cons to that. Maybe you can help me out in kind of determining which greenhouse will be the best fit for that.
Yeah.
I know there's a few different options, but I'll let you kind of dig deep into what the different types are.
Yeah.
And we'll go from there.
You know, first off, I think it's something that's new that strawberries started being grown in greenhouses.
Yeah.
I think it just started I'm going to say it was brought to my attention maybe 5-6 years ago.
You know, it makes sense though, because I mean, outdoors you lose almost 20-30% of your crop just to the elements and rodents and whatnot.
If you look at history of BC farmland, most strawberries were always grown. Well, we were known to be a high producing strawberry area.
Yeah.
Then with all of the diseases and the weather conditions and loss of crop, less and less people put strawberries in, started ripping them out, put blueberries in, put raspberries in, did other vegetable crops. What we're seeing starting coming back, and it's good that you guys are thinking about this, is we're seeing strawberries come back, but in greenhouses. So going back to your question, there are 3 different types of greenhouses that I've seen, just not only strawberries, but generically a lot of other crops. You've got that the poly greenhouses, which is kind of like paper like poly paper film, yeah. And then you've got your polycarbonate, which it's almost like plastic like. And then there's clear, and then there's one that is a little bit thicker, which we maybe will go over in the differences. Mm-hmm. And then there's glass. Probably the better out of the 3. It's the high end. It's the higher cost version of doing greenhouses. They all work. I've seen them work from poly all the way to glass. Yeah. It's just you have better control in yield. You have better control in your environment, heating, lighting, and even production. Mm-hmm. Right? And in glass versus just your basic poly.
And that's all it is. It's really just trying to control the elements,
trying to
increase your growing season throughout the year, right? Yeah. It's just taking back that control from Mother Nature.
Yeah.
What about vertical? Is that something that you're seeing?
It's been in talks for the last 5 years as well. Vertical farming is. I've seen it in containers. Mm-hmm. A lot of people have been doing vertical growing in containers. I haven't seen a full-scale, big commercial site, but I've heard there are a few that are across Canada that are being tested with lettuce heads. Yeah. From what I've heard, I haven't seen it yet, is that it's automated from beginning to end. From seed to packaging in a box, it's fully automated. Wow. No human touches the actual lettuce up until that point. And I've heard you can change the color, you can change the sugar content. It's amazing, right? But I think looking 20, 30, 40 years down the line, and you see what climate change has been doing, I think it's probably going to be the way of the future. Growing indoors, either by greenhouse, warehouses, containers, anything that's in a controlled environment is going to be better for the environment long term, right?
Yeah, and it's also just efficiency, really. You're getting multiple acres on top of each other, right? So yes. That's, it's efficiency, it's land usability, right?
Yeah. I know someone they're in the testing phase right now, and it's quite interesting when he told me that the ratio of, he's getting 30-1. So with what he's producing in 1 acre of a closed environment is equivalent to almost 30 acres of land. And that's insane. Yeah. So you can just, but it does take more infrastructure cost, right? But it's still more cost effective and it's scalable. So you don't need as much land, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Now I know a few farmers that are kind of getting into that strawberries on mounds
Yeah,
within a greenhouse,
yeah,
or a couple of different options like that. I guess we should dig deeper into the ones that we have. Poly greenhouse as
yeah.
an example. Maybe you can tell me a little bit more about what that difference is between the other
Yeah,
ones.
poly greenhouses, those are the type of greenhouses you might see in a backyard. You've probably seen them on farmland too. It's poly film,
Right.
and it's mostly there's two types of frames. It's wood frame or metal frame that they use. Um, the poly itself, it is the cheapest alternative. Anywhere from $100,000 to $150,000 for 1 acre, you can pretty much build it out. The difference is that poly film you're going to have to change every 4 to 5 years, and that is because it gets beaten up by the sun, and just as how effective it is going to be for the actual greenhouse, it doesn't control the environment a whole lot. Yes, you can control rain and somewhat of sunlight and control somewhat of heating. You could still hook up like heaters to it. You can hook irrigation up to it. It's kind of like any other infrastructure, right? But it's probably the cheapest alternative to ground crops. Yeah, and we do see the different types of crops we see there are mostly like herbs. We'll see different types of vegetables. I've seen a lot of nursery operations.
Yeah,
using
that's
it.
the one that we see a lot of.
Yeah, mostly just any nursery plants, something that need us a cheaper controlled environment, right?
Yeah, mostly propagation, really. Like you're kind of
Yeah.
just starting it off, and then it kind of moves into the outside fields, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, no, that makes sense. What about polycarbonate? What's the difference?
So polycarbonate is like it's really well more advanced than it is just from the polyfilm. It's almost equivalent to glass greenhouses.
Okay.
It is that powerful. It's that controlled. What I've heard from a majority of our clientele that have used it, it doesn't give you the yields, the higher yields. It doesn't give you as much sunlight as you would from a glass greenhouse. They're basically they're all metal frame, and it's a thick plastic that they shape towards the frame of the greenhouse. Mostly you'll see them in these hoops, or you'll see them straight walled and then they're hooped on the top, and they come in like a thick plastic. Yeah, and you can pretty much use it for flowers. You can use it for any type of vegetable, and nurseries, herbs. Again, you can do it on that, but you'll get a better, not as good of a scale as you'll see it in glass greenhouses. You'll see it, but better than the poly ones. You will see majority of the bigger commercial scaled farmers using polycarbonate versus, because they also last long. You don't have to change the carbonate. It's less maintenance. Even if it's hailing or strong snow and whatever, and you can grow at a longer period of time throughout the year. So there are their advantages. The cost for that is typically somewhere between like 5 to 6 or even up to 700,000 per acre, depending on how you want to structure that house, right?
That's interesting. I mean, that seems like a good fit. I don't know if strawberries would be good for that one. I think that's probably.
I have actually seen strawberries in that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it comes down to how much yield you're expecting.
Yeah.
And
if you only need a little bit, then it's not too bad.
And
right?
I think the more you can control the environment, the better yields you'll be able to get. And I think polycarbonate is one of that. It's not ridiculously expensive like glass greenhouses, but it's good enough that you can still get a decent yield. It's also return on investment, right?
That's right.
Like you're not gonna.
Get it paid off.
Well, can you not only pay it off, can you scale it?
Yeah.
Right. And are you a commercial grower or a backyard grower?
Right.
So I think those are the differences of why I see more people going towards polycarbonate, because they have an expansion plan. They want to be a commercial grower.
What about like tunnels? That's what tunnels are made of, or is it more the
Well,
poly?
tunnels are both poly and polycarbonate, but
Yeah.
again, it just comes down to the use.
Right. It's just a little bit more heat kind of being contained in, which allows them to grow a little bit better, right? So I've seen blueberries like this actually. But it might be poly though.
It's poly. Yeah, you've seen it in poly where they'll control the sunlight. Like you can see later blueberry crops where Elliott variety is more sensitive to rain. So what they do is they'll make these hoops and then they use it for protection for the rain, but at the same time they'll be able to control the sunlight coming in. And I remember when this is going back, I'm gonna say 2005, 2006, I used to go with my dad to go drop off the blueberry loads. And there was a packing facility that were one of the first people to have greenhouse hoops, poly greenhouse hoops on blueberry farms.
That was you guys.
It wasn't us. It was a different farm, but I was amazed. But from what I can remember at that time, their production yield was better. They had minimal damage. They've also got to, at that time, Elliott was bringing in like $2.50 a pound or something on the higher end, and you're guaranteed to pick it off. Yeah. And I remember at that time, I think it cost like $8,000 an acre, and at that time, everybody thought that was high, right? Because to plant an entire field was like 10,000 at that time.
I can imagine that would be really good for even pollination, because even the bees can stay kind of inside, and even if it's rainy conditions or whatever the case may be, it'll be, a good environment for them.
For sure. One thing with polycarbonate is you can hook up a automation system. So like Previa is like is a type of software that helps control the irrigation system. It controls even the roofs. They also open automatically, so it lets in a certain amount of wind. It controls the heat that way if it wants to release some heat. So you have those options as well. If you want automation, polycarbonate, you could do that as well with that.
I feel like there's flexibility here because there's levels to this, right? Polycarbonate, you can have low end or you can have the high end with all the automation. Yeah. So it's actually a good versatile option. Perfect. And I guess that leads into glass. I guess where do we start with that?
Glass greenhouses, same thing, metal frame. Yeah. Glass panels. Okay. I'm pretty sure everybody's seen a glass greenhouse. What we've seen, the cost is very high. So it averages anywhere from 1.2 to up to about $1.8 million per acre, depending on what type of stuff you put inside of it. And it's also the height. Now I believe most, like if someone was going to build a greenhouse today, the height they're trying to reach is 6 meters. 5 years ago or 10 years ago, it used to be at 5 meters. Before that, it was 4 meters. And that's just based on the volume. Mm-hmm. Then they have a more growing capacity. Right. The guys that are investing this type of money are definitely not your backyard growers. They are commercial growers that are focused on a specific crop. Yeah. So what we've seen most is cucumbers, tomatoes, and peppers. Yes. That's the one that brings the best return, highest volume, and that's something that's worth investing in. And it's a big cost. Like you're looking at 10 acres, that's almost $15 million just for infrastructure, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we've seen a few. I mean, I've seen a couple of your listings. They're just, massive mammoths of, properties that are just, it seems almost very industrial. Like it seems like it is a completely farm industrial kind of.
It's the perfect example for agribusiness to its max scale. Exactly. Where you have a massive warehouse for packing, sorting, packing, shipping, growing all within one location. Mm-hmm. Some of these facilities are phenomenal. Like, right. I don't want to mention the company's name, but they're one of our clients. They, you go into these facilities, you're in awe of just the automation, just the level of sophistication. It's amazing stuff. Like greenhouses, I got into the market. Greenhouses has always been a hard market to get into when we start real estate. And I got into it about 4 or 5 years ago, aggressively. And that all happened when the cannabis boom was happening, when all these people wanted to buy greenhouses. So we've sold a lot of greenhouses from a smaller 5-acre scale up to, I think the biggest one we sold was a 30-acre greenhouse. And that was on a big high-end commercial scale. And just learning the processes in between that, these facilities are amazing. Like there's CO2, you can control the CO2 levels, you can control the fertilizer, like there's mixing tanks for fertilizers that automatically put it in certain sections of the greenhouse temperature control by all the glass. You've probably seen some glass windows open on the top. That's just controlling the heating. They have these shades that are in the inside, so they can almost kind of control the light that comes in. So if it's like too bright, too sunny, they'll put these shade lights. They call them shades. Controlling irrigation. Oh man, it's something else. Like
these are massive operations. I mean, even for the employees themselves, I've seen some with like 250, 300 employees, right? So it really comes down to, these are actually good conditions for them to be employed in. Like, because you're in a clean environment, it's controlled, it's organized, it makes sense. There's a lot of operations.
It's all year round. So what we see is most greenhouse growers, they'll start prepping their greenhouses in January. So they'll get all the strings ready, they'll clear the floors, get them polyed up again, and then they'll have the rock coil, they'll set all of those up, get the propagation pads, and then have them all prepared in January. Come full circle, so they'll grow every year, they'll grow in height, and then they're picking as they go. So it's continuous harvest. It's not something that you just go in once and pick it and you wait. It's continuous harvest, right? And then closer to November, December, they'll clean everything out. They'll let it sit for maybe 2-3 weeks at the end, from maybe the last 2 weeks or the last 3 weeks of December, maybe the first week of January, and it's all year round. And that's the benefit of a controlled environment. You can control almost everything in that greenhouse, right?
I don't know if that's the investment that we would require for strawberries, but maybe the polycarbonate. I'm thinking that's kind of the we would be way we.
What I would suggest, if it's kind of something, the first thing you're going to do, I would just try it with the poly.
Right.
Do some testing, see how it is, see how it works. Small scale, figure out the kinks, see if you can maximize in the poly greenhouse. And if you see, okay, hey, this is working and you've got a market to sell, okay, then let's go reinvest that 500 to 700 grand into a polycarbonate greenhouse and then scale it. Trial and error, right? Especially with a new product that you're not familiar with, it's always good to just do A/B testing and just kind of figure out what the best scenario is for the family, right?
That kind of wraps it up for small end, right? I mean, if it's on the high end, I mean, you're looking at glass greenhouses and whatnot. I mean, there's probably some considerations we got to go through when we're buying or selling. I assume financing is the biggest thing. For getting into that.
Yeah. So if there's somebody out there that's looking to buy an existing greenhouse, there's a lot of due diligence. It's not something that you walk in and say, okay, 2-week subjects, 30-day close. No, it's almost 30 to 60-day due diligence. There's a lot of moving parts, as we discussed. So, you got to make sure you get the farmer's 3 to 4 year financials, making sure that there's consistency in the production. You got to make sure that the quota that's provided by a certain broker. In BC, there's like the 3 main brokers. There used to be 4. Well, I still think they're around. I just never heard of them as much. So there's BC Hothouse, Windset. Windset is one of the largest in Western North America, probably the most popular. And then there's Howlings. So these guys are brokers. They'll provide you a quota. And all that quota is saying is, hey, you can grow 5 acres of peppers and I will promise to sell it because I've already found a market for it.
Yeah. So, for example, Windset will already have their buyers that are already looking for X amount of product.
So their buyer is Costco, Save On. So,
exactly.
So the actual farmer doesn't have to rebrand himself. He doesn't have to go look for those markets. He'll package under the broker's name, so whatever it may be, and they'll ship it directly to these stores under Windset or with the broker's name. But the thing is, the brokers, they're finding these markets to sell in to make sure that the farmers can sell their product. The beauty part of a quota system is the buyers are already there before they issue the quota. So you can budget, you can plan your expansion. Not like some other farming opportunities that we're in, like blueberries. It's up and down. You just don't know what you're going to get that year, and you don't know what your production is going to be.
You don't know how the weather's going to be.
Exactly. So the thing with these greenhouses is you can kind of scale, okay, how much production we're going to have. It is quite consistent and it's predictable, and it's also scalable. Like, how do we go from X amount of kilos per square meter to a little bit more, and you'd be surprised. Just changing the littlest things in these greenhouses will get you to that a little bit better, right? And that's what these greenhouse guys do. And so you want to make sure when you're purchasing a farm that has quota, is it transferable? And a lot of these brokers, they're just not going to transfer it to any random newbie. They're going to want to make sure, do you have experience? Do you have training? Can you grow the same or better quality product that the existing guy that we had quota with? So what they'll do is they'll try to keep, they'll pretty much, the brokers will give you a 1 year trial. The way we help the buyers transition with the sellers is we try to get the sellers to do some training. We try to get them to have their management employees stay at least for a year until they can transition and get their own people in place.
Right, and a lot of times they probably want to stay indefinitely anyways. Employees and management, if they.
Well, it depends if what the seller's plan is, right? Like, so what we've seen is a lot of greenhouse properties that are selling. They're not selling to get out of the business because the business does really well. They're selling to scale. So I'm going to sell this 20 acres of glass because I bought this 100 acres of land and I want to build 100 acres of glass rather than just staying on this 20.
Right.
So they're scaling on a bigger scale.
Well, that's looking pretty attractive. The only problem is it's expensive, right? Yeah. I mean, that's probably the hindrance right now.
Financials, quota, management, making sure you cross your T's, dot your I's with the equipment list, training.
Yeah, ideally retain the management, retain the employees.
Getting the proper inspectors. This is key. Most of these glass greenhouses have massive boiler systems. They have irrigation systems. They have automation systems. They need to be inspected. Yeah. Because, you've got one thing down or one big problem, it'll run you like $100,000 to maybe even up to $500,000. Yeah. So you got to make sure before you proceed is you make sure you get your homework done correctly. Also, we talked about this before previously, is this held by a corporation? Is it its only entity under that corporation? Can the buyer do a share purchase? Right? So, which is huge on these $15 million purchases.
I guess equipment is another thing. Typically, is it included or not? I don't know.
Most times, when someone's buying an operation, they want everything part of that operation. Right. So there's usually carts. These carts is what they drive within each of within each row of the greenhouse. They have a certain of carts, packaging equipment. So there's there's sorters. So when they run the belts when they harvest, there's sorters. There's size sorters. There's color sorters. Those are always included. Or else that individual who's purchasing won't be able to run the operation and get it and pack it as well, right? So most times, all equipment is included.
Yeah, I feel like that's a much smaller piece of the pie compared to the land and the glass, right? Yeah. So usually it's lesser consideration.
That's right.
So typically they would probably throw it in there and include it, right? So retrofitting, is that something that needs to be of a concern? Like if you're going into bell pepper kind of industry and you're just going to continue with the same kind of quota and everything else, then it makes sense. And that's why you don't need any retrofitting. But if you're going to switch it up to like some marijuana or something else, cannabis.
So the biggest retrofits that we saw in the last 5 years was we saw these greenhouses convert to cannabis. Yeah. Massive retrofitting, like we're talking probably another $500,000 to $1 million an acre on top of what it was high. Now that the way we've seen the cannabis industry, it's starting to balance itself out. We've got some of the players that have succeeded. We have some of them that were kind of more a stock play and it was more pumped than it was produced. And you're starting to see a lot of the guys exit out of the business. Now you've got these greenhouses that have been retrofitted, and it's going to be very difficult to retrofit. It's going to cost significantly high to retrofit back into a vegetable greenhouse. So you have to make sure that you get it at a discount. Yeah. Like that's what it comes down to. If you're not going to be in the cannabis space and you're buying a cannabis facility to put into production into vegetables, chances are you're going to have to spend a lot of money for retrofitting. So you're going to have to budget that in if you're trying to buy an older greenhouse.
That can be a huge hindrance. I mean, depending on what your plans are, right? So,
You'd be surprised. It's not as big,
okay.
but because the stuff that these cannabis companies put in, majority of the stuff you don't need, like ACs and certain, like they don't need blackout screens. They just needed shading, right? So like there's certain things where these cannabis guys put in, it is excessive. Like it's ridiculously excessive. It depends. Every greenhouse is different. The way they've set it up is completely different. Yeah. So I've seen the extreme retrofit, and I've seen something that's very bare minimum. And so it all depends on how far they took it.
Well, shoot, that kind of covers up what I was interested in terms of the strawberry side of things. I think I'm probably in the poly versus polycarbonate debate. But maybe one day, I do see the benefit of going into the glass. I do see that, there is a lot of advantages, a lot of control. There might be a future there as well. Any final thoughts?
No, just, when you're buying and selling, when you're selling greenhouses as a facility itself, they're all businessmen. They know that you need to have your financials on point. You need your equipment list. You need how they also are aware that they're going to have to probably train someone that's going to come in and purchase some of these greenhouses, right? So it goes for saying both buyers and sellers are kind of aware that they're buying a business. Just making sure that when you're buying something at that scale, due diligence is key.
And I guess one of our positions in this is that we connect you with the professionals that you need to essentially help you get started, or whatever the case may be. If you need to retrofit or you need to get the inspections done, we provide all that, right? So helps out. Awesome. That covers that.